Hey YouTube, uh, back again. I want to answer a question for you. I had a really sincere person ask me this question. At first, I thought he was just trying to be crazy, but he asked me. He said, "Isn't Christianity a white man's religion?" And I thought about that. I was like, "Wow, okay. Well, no, it's not just a white man's religion." But he required some explanation, so I'm going to assume that you might require a little bit of explanation. All right. So here's a couple of things you need to do. You can't trust, you know, your Nation of Islam friends or whatever, because they're, you can't trust that. All right. You need to go to Amazon.com. You need to get you a couple of books so you can read about this stuff yourself. First book you need to get from Amazon is Black Man's Religion. All right, by Keener and Usry. All right, Keener, Keener, and Usry, Usry. Keener and Usry, Black Man's Religion. Gives you the history of Christianity in Africa, how Islam even got to Africa, why Christianity predates Islam in Africa, and why Islam is not the first religion of black people, and just a whole lot of other really good stuff in that book. Another book you need to get is Beyond Roots. It's by William McKissick, MCC, I think it's Kissick, William McKissick. You can probably get that on Amazon.com too, Beyond Roots. And there's a lot of other good books, but those two books will get you started in your study. They reference in their bibliographies, they give you some other books that they got their information from, so you can study the issue and understand this for yourself. Okay. Number two, if you read the Bible, you'll notice that all of the authors except for one was a person of color. The only person that wrote in the Bible out of like 50 something authors, Old and New Testament, the only person that wrote in the Bible who was not from Africa or the Middle East, somewhere in Asia, is Luke. Luke wrote Acts and Luke wrote the book of Luke. He was from Greece. He's the only guy. You can't say Christianity is a white man's religion. White people had nothing to do with the writing of the Bible. All right? Virtually nothing to do. Thirdly, look at the people in the Bible. All the people in the Old Testament that are mentioned are all people of color. All of them. Almost everywhere in the New Testament, when people are mentioned, it's almost always people of color. Greece is mentioned a couple of times. Rome is mentioned a couple of times. But for the most part, other than those couple of times, 2 or 3 times for each of those places, every other place and every other people group mentioned is people of color. If this was a white man's religion, something that white men wrote and white men are perpetrating, I think it would have a lot more white people writing it, and it would be writing a lot more about white people. All right? Thirdly, or secondly, I don't know which one I'm on, but Jesus was born in the 1st century. Okay? Muhammad wasn't even born into the 5th century. I'm talking 500 years after Jesus Christ, Muhammad comes on the scene and Islam starts to spread. So people were worshiping Christ in Asia and in Africa 500 years before Muhammad and before the spread of Islam. All right? Next, look at the early church fathers, the people who were grassroots in Christianity after the death of Christ and the ascension of Christ. People who started in the church and started Christianity growing. Tertullian. Go to the public library and just look it up. Tertullian, Cyprian, Athanasius, St. Augustine. All of these dudes were people of color from Africa. All of them. As a matter of fact, St. Augustine was a pastor in North Africa. And he wrote The City of God, which is, people, that's standard reading in a whole lot of colleges. He wrote Confessions of St. Augustine, you may be familiar with. These are all people of color, man. All right? And these are the early church fathers, the people who were at the beginning of the movement, right? So Christianity is not a white man's religion. It's just not. Anybody who says that to you, you have to correct them. Let them know that, people believe that because of all the evil that was perpetrated against African people in North America. It gives a bitter taste in our mouths, and we reject Christianity because we're rejecting the white man. But don't reject something that's true just because it was used improperly by some people. Everybody, God's going to pay them back. Nobody gets away with anything. But don't reject Christianity because some white people used it, and they did. You know, they would use the scripture, obey your master, and twist the scripture, manipulate the scripture to manipulate black people, African people. But Christianity is not a white man's religion. It was just used in a foul way by some people in North America. And speaking of that, let me end with this. In reference to the North American slave trade, you do find in the Bible where God did allow slavery, okay? In Philemon in the New Testament, and I think Leviticus or Numbers, chapter 25 through 27, somewhere like that. It's either Leviticus or Numbers. Anyway, God allowed slavery, but don't get it twisted. The slavery that God, two things, the slavery that God allowed was nothing like North American slavery. All right, the slavery that God allowed, he didn't advocate and push for it and teach that you have to do it, but he allowed his people to do it. And I'll tell you why in a second. But that slavery, those slaves could, just like most of the slavery in Africa, all right, those slaves could marry into the master's household. They could easily gain their freedom. They were treated like human beings. And often became good friends with the master in his household. They weren't beat and whipped and raped and degraded like you see in North American slavery. Totally different. It was more like indentured servanthood than it was slavery. Second of all, God did allow it. If I was God, I wouldn't, but I'm not God. I don't understand why he allowed it. I can't tell you what's going through God's mind, but he had allowed a couple of things because of the hardness of his people's heart. Matthew chapter 19, Jesus said that God allowed divorce. It was never God's original intention that people got divorced, but he allowed divorce because people were so hard-hearted and they were going to do it anyway. And God was like, well, I could punish you for doing it, or I could just go ahead and let you slide. And God said, I'm going to go ahead and let you slide and get divorces, although I don't like it. And the same way with slavery. Okay, so, but that's no reason to reject the whole of Christianity because of something you don't understand. Anyway, I don't want to make this tape too long. Christianity is not a white man's religion. I hope that you'll study it for yourself. Don't believe the hype. Don't let nobody take you to hell and reject God because of because of the evil and the hatred they have in their heart towards white people. Okay, that's just not cool. All right. So anyway, I'm done. Hope that was helpful. God bless you. I'll see you on the next video.